I thought he was just a pile of trash the first time I saw him curled up by the diner. That's what I said out loud, mostly to myself, and maybe a little to the world, because the world seemed to be ignoring him. It was a Thursday morning. I remember because that's my usual route to the hardware store, and I always stop by Trudy's diner for a coffee and a bacon sandwich. That morning, I nearly tripped over what looked like a mess of newspapers and a ripped-up blanket right outside the entrance. Then the pile moved. A small head peeked out, ears too big for its face, and one eye barely open. He didn't flinch when I stepped closer. He didn't growl, didn't even lift his head. He just looked at me like I was nothing new. Now, I've never been what folks would call a dog person. I like animals, don't get me wrong, but I never thought much about owning one. My wife, Sarah, had begged me for years to get a dog before she passed, but I always told her we didn't have time or space. We had the time. We had the space. I just didn't have the heart. After she died, that house felt like it had room for 100 dogs, and still I didn't go out looking. But this one, this scrawny, dirt-covered pup on the sidewalk, he wasn't just looking for food. He was looking for somewhere to belong. And he'd chosen that little patch of sidewalk like it was home. I didn't know then that he'd been there for over a week already. I'd just never seen him because I took different routes depending on the errands I had. Trudy stepped out with her apron still on, and I asked her if she'd seen the pup before. She sighed and nodded. "That little guy's been there every night this week," she said, wiping her hands on a towel. "Won't let anyone near him. People drop scraps, that's all." I stared down at him. The fur on his back was matted with something sticky, and I could count his ribs without even trying. His eyes were brown, but too tired to shine. There was a small chain hanging loosely from his neck, like someone had tried to keep him once, or maybe tied him up somewhere and left him. "He sleep here every night?" "Same spot," Trudy said. "Won't budge, even when we wash the sidewalks." I bent down slowly, trying not to startle him. He didn't move, just watched. I reached out my hand, and he blinked but didn't pull away. It was like he'd already decided I wasn't going to hurt him. Or maybe he was just too tired to care. I didn't pick him up. I left him there and went inside, ordered 2 sandwiches instead of 1. I ate one, gave the other to him outside. He sniffed it, looked at me, then devoured it, like it was the first meal he'd ever had. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing him lying there in the cold, pressed up against the bricks of Trudy's. And the next morning, I didn't take a different route. I brought a blanket, a shallow bowl of water, and a couple sausages wrapped in foil. He was still there. He lifted his head when I arrived, like he recognized me. I laid the blanket down beside him and gently slid it underneath his bony frame. He didn't resist, just shifted a little so his head rested on it. I left the food. He ate slower this time. This went on for 4 days. He never left that spot. People started noticing. Kids walking to school would slow down and whisper to each other. Some tried to pet him, but he always backed away, curling into himself like he'd disappear. One man, never saw him before, called him ugly and joked that he'd probably run off the fleas in the neighborhood. I wanted to say something, but I didn't. I just sat next to him. Day 5, I decided to bring a leash. He didn't like that. The moment he saw it, he stood up, first time I'd seen him stand, and limped away a few feet. Not far, just enough to say no thanks. His back right leg didn't look right. He put barely any weight on it. I sat there, leash in my lap, and talked to him. Just talked. About Sarah. About the cold. About how people forget you when you're quiet and small and don't ask for anything. He came back. Didn't let me put the leash on, but curled back onto the blanket. On the 7th day, something changed. I arrived earlier than usual, just as the sun was coming up. Trudy was unlocking the diner, and we both noticed the same thing at the same time. He wasn't alone. A young couple, probably in their late 20s, was crouched next to him. The girl was crying. The man was holding a phone, filming or taking photos. My heart sank. I thought maybe they were trying to go viral or something. Take pictures of a sad puppy and get sympathy clicks online. I walked faster. But when I got closer, the man stood up and smiled. "You the one who's been feeding him?" I nodded, arms crossed. "We've seen him here every day," he said. "We live a few blocks down. My wife here, she couldn't stop thinking about him. We've been bringing food at night, but he always waited until we left before eating." The girl wiped her eyes. "We thought maybe he belonged to someone who worked around here." "Nah," I said. "He belongs to that sidewalk." We all laughed, but it wasn't funny, really. They asked if I had plans for him. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to take him in, but I wasn't sure I was ready. Still, the thought of him going somewhere else made my chest tight. "I think he's waiting," I said. Waiting for something. They didn't push. They left some fresh water and went on their way. That night, it rained. I parked my truck and sat watching him from across the street, wipers going back and forth. He didn't move to find cover, just curled up like always, head on the blanket I'd replaced that morning. I got out, popped the umbrella, and walked over. He was soaked. I knelt down, opened the truck door, and tried again with the leash. He didn't move away this time. I looped it gently, and he let me. I lifted him, careful of his leg, and placed him on the passenger seat. He didn't look at me, didn't wag his tail, just laid his head down on the old towel I'd brought. I drove home in silence. It's been years since Sarah passed, but that night I swore I felt her there, like she was in the truck with us, watching with one of her soft smiles, saying, "Took you long enough." He didn't explore the house, just laid by the back door and slept for hours. I made an appointment with the vet the next morning. They said he was around 7 months old. Malnourished, leg healing from an old break. No chip, no collar, no one was looking for him. I named him Fender, because the first time I saw him, he was curled up next to the front fender of my truck like he belonged there. He still limped, but he started following me around the yard after a few days. Never barked, never whined, just watched. Always watched. Like he was waiting for someone to tell him it was okay to be home now. And little by little, he started believing it. The first morning Fender trotted into the kitchen on his own. I nearly dropped my mug. He still limped a little, his back leg stiff, but he didn't flinch when his nails clicked against the linoleum. Just padded in, sat by the table, and looked at me like he'd been doing it for years. I smiled, then poured a little bacon grease into his bowl and added dry food. He ate every bite without rushing. For the first time in a long while, the house didn't feel so still. That morning I brought him along to the hardware store. He rode in the truck bed, bundled in blankets and resting his chin on the edge like he was watching the world go by. At the store, people noticed. "Is that the Sidewalk dog?" Pete asked, stepping out from behind the counter. "Yeah," I said. "Took him home a few nights ago." Pete smiled, one of those crooked grins that made you think he knew something you didn't. "He looks better already. You keeping him?" I shrugged. "I think he's keeping me." The day went by slow, the way I liked it. Fender stayed close, either curled by my feet or stretched out under the truck when we worked outside. He didn't bark at anyone, didn't try to run. Just stayed near, eyes calm. When I locked up that evening, he was already waiting in the truck. The next week, we fell into rhythm. Mornings were breakfast and coffee, then a drive into town or work in the backyard. I had a fence to patch and an old tool shed I kept meaning to fix. Now, with Fender around, I had company that didn't need small talk. He'd lie in the grass, chewing on sticks or just watching squirrels. Sometimes he'd get brave and chase one. He never caught any, but he always looked proud just for trying. I started talking to him more. I'd tell him about Sarah, how she would have spoiled him rotten, about the things I hadn't told anyone. I even found myself telling him about my brother, Mark, who I hadn't seen in 5 years. Fender just listened. No judgment. Just those big brown eyes staring up, tail giving the occasional thump. One day, I took him to Trudy's. The moment she saw him hop out of the truck, her eyes lit up. "Well, Albie, you finally brought him in." Fender wagged his tail, something he hadn't done for anyone else. "He looks good. Healthier," she said, kneeling slowly to offer him a biscuit. He sniffed it, then took it gently from her hand. A few regulars clapped when they saw him. One old man shouted from across the diner, "Didn't think that mutt would make it." "He's got a name," I said. "Fender." "Well, Fender's looking fine." I sat with my coffee and watched Fender curl up beside the booth, resting his head on my boot. A couple customers came by to pet him. He didn't back away this time, let them scratch his ears, even wagged his tail. When we got back to the house, there was a box on the porch. No name, no note, just a cardboard box taped shut. I opened it carefully. Dog treats, a collar, a new leash, 2 bags of food. I looked around. No cars nearby, no one walking past. I figured it had to be the couple from before. Maybe Trudy tipped them off. I shook my head and smiled. I set the new collar aside and tossed him a treat. He caught it in mid-air. The next big surprise came 3 days later, when I let Fender off the leash in the backyard for the first time. We'd been doing short walks along the road, me holding the new leash loose while he explored. But that day, I unclipped him, figuring the backyard fence was good enough. He sniffed for a minute, then bolted. My heart jumped into my throat. But he wasn't running away. He was running in circles, kicking up dirt, skidding in the grass like a puppy should. He barked. Not a loud bark, just a happy, open-mouth yelp. Then another. He zipped around the garden until he was panting hard, then plopped himself in the dirt, tongue lolling. I sat on the porch steps, watching, and couldn't help but laugh. The next day, I went to the shelter in town. It wasn't big, just a couple of rooms and a fenced-in yard. The woman behind the desk, Marlene, smiled when I came in. "We heard about you," she said. "You the guy who took the Sidewalk pup?" "Guess that's me." She leaned on the counter. "I think he was brought in once. Some kids found him limping on the highway, but he bolted before we could scan him. Looked like someone had dumped him." I nodded. "He's got a scar on his hind leg. Vet said it might have been broken." Marlene frowned. "Poor guy. You want help registering him?" I agreed. We filled out the paperwork. I gave them my number in case anyone ever asked about a lost pup, though I doubted it. No one that careless comes looking later. On the way out, I passed a row of kennels. Dogs of all sizes pressed against the bars, tails wagging or barking for attention. A small mutt in the last cage reminded me of Fender. Skinny, black fur, one floppy ear. He didn't bark, just stared. "That one's new," Marlene said. "Found behind a grocery store. Scared of everything." I bent down. The dog backed away. "You want to try socializing him sometime?" she asked. "You seem to have a way with the quiet ones." I didn't answer right away, but I thought about it. That night, I sat on the porch with Fender beside me, his chin resting on my knee. "What do you think, buddy? You ready to be a big brother?" He blinked, then sighed. I took it as a maybe. A week later, I stopped by the shelter again. The floppy-eared mutt was still there, though he'd crept closer when he saw me. Marlene let me take him into the yard. He stayed near the fence, shaking, but didn't bolt. I sat with him for an hour. Said nothing. Just sat. Fender had taught me that much. After 2 more visits, the mutt let me scratch behind his ear. I brought Fender in the next time. He was calm, sniffed the new dog once, then laid in the sun. The other dog kept his distance, but watched. By the end of the month, I had 2 dogs. I named the new one Rusty, after the color of his paws. Took him longer to come around. He didn't like loud sounds or sudden movements, but he followed Fender everywhere. If Fender drank water, so did Rusty. If Fender laid on the porch, Rusty curled up a few feet away. They became a pair. Quiet, shaggy shadows at my side. Then, one morning, Fender didn't come to the kitchen. His bowl was full. He hadn't touched it. I found him in the hallway, lying still. Eyes open, but not right. I knelt beside him, called his name. He lifted his head, just barely, then dropped it again. Panic shot through me. I lifted him gently, carried him to the truck, and drove straight to the vet. Rusty whined the whole way from the passenger seat. Dr. Morris met us at the door. He didn't waste time, took Fender straight back. I paced for 20 minutes, hands clenched. Finally, the door opened. "Looks like he picked up a stomach bug," the vet said. "Maybe something he ate out in the yard. We'll keep him overnight, get him fluids. Should be fine." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Rusty and I waited until closing. The techs let us sit in the back room while Fender rested. He was hooked up to a little IV, eyes half closed, but peaceful. Rusty wouldn't leave his side. The next morning, I brought him home. He moved slower for a few days, but soon he was back to chasing squirrels. Rusty stuck close, more protective than ever. It was around then that something strange started happening. People in town, neighbors, folks I barely knew, began stopping by. Some brought bags of dog food. Others brought blankets or toys. One lady handed me a hand-knit sweater for Fender. I didn't even know dogs wore sweaters. Turns out someone had posted our story online. That couple, the ones who saw him on the sidewalk, they'd taken photos and shared them, called him the Sidewalk Miracle. I wasn't thrilled at first, but the responses were kind. Dozens of comments from people saying how they'd followed his story. Kids sending letters, drawings. One boy wrote, "I hope Fender knows he's special now." I sat down with Fender and read every single one. He didn't understand the words, but he knew something was different. He sat taller after that, trotted a little faster, greeted people who came up the drive. I didn't expect it to grow the way it did. Folks started calling me the dog whisperer of Maplewood. Local news ran a short story. Then someone asked if I'd consider fostering more dogs. I looked at Fender, then Rusty, then at the old shed I'd patched up months ago. I started clearing it out. The backyard got busier. Volunteers showed up. A fence was extended. Kennels were donated. And before long, that shed became the start of something bigger. But through it all, Fender stayed by my side. He'd sleep by the porch, tail flicking, ears twitching at every sound. He watched each new arrival with calm eyes, like he was telling them, "You're safe now." And somehow, they always believed him. It was mid-October when the first cold snap rolled in, and I remember because Rusty spent the entire morning digging a hole beneath the porch like he was building a bunker. Fender, on the other hand, took one look at the frost and backed right into the living room where the space heater was already humming. He gave me a glance that said, quite plainly, "You're on your own out there." The rescue shelter was still just a backyard operation then, but the number of dogs coming in had nearly doubled. It started slow. Someone would call or drop by with a pup they'd found under a porch or in a box behind the supermarket. Then it got bigger. Folks from 2 towns over started bringing dogs. A farmer showed up one Saturday with a litter he couldn't care for. He left them in a crate by the fence with a note that read, "Please help." I didn't plan on turning my life into a rescue, but Fender had already changed everything else, and it didn't feel right to turn anyone away. So I built more pens, added heat lamps, picked up second-hand dog houses from a lady named Martha, who ran a flea market 3 counties away. Volunteers kept showing up, mostly teenagers from the high school, and a few retirees who just liked having somewhere to be. Trudy started bringing over hot soup in the afternoons. Pete from the hardware store gave me a discount on lumber. Even Marlene from the shelter came by to help me set up a record-keeping system so I could track each dog, their shots, vet visits, adoption inquiries. She said we were becoming legit, whether I wanted to admit it or not. But through all of it, Fender remained the anchor. Every dog that came through met him first. He didn't rush them or bark. He'd just walk over, sniff, then sit nearby and watch. If they were scared, they stayed back. If they were curious, they crept closer. Either way, they always found a rhythm by watching him. I can't explain it, but dogs trusted him. Rusty helped too, in his own way. He was still skittish, still flinched at loud bangs or doors closing too fast. But when he followed Fender, the others followed him. It was like they were a team without knowing it. 2 quiet leaders who never asked for the role, but wore it like second skins. One Tuesday morning, a school bus stopped in front of my driveway. I didn't know what to make of it at first. I stepped outside with Fender at my heel, and a teacher hopped off the bus. "You Mr. Hobbs?" she asked. "Yeah. I'm Miss Lacey. I teach 2nd grade at Maplewood Elementary. One of my students wrote an essay about your dog, said he saved your life." I blinked. "Well, I don't know about all that." She smiled. "We're doing a project about local heroes. Thought the kids might like to visit. See the dogs. Maybe donate some supplies." The doors opened, and 15 little kids came pouring out, each carrying a bag of something. Blankets, kibble, toys, dog bowls. One kid had a leash wrapped around his neck like a necklace. Fender sat beside me, tail flicking. He didn't move when the kids came closer. A few reached out to pet him, and he let them. One girl wrapped her arms around his neck, and he just blinked. "He's soft," she whispered, as if it was a secret. Miss Lacey organized them into small groups, and we gave a little tour. I showed them the pens, the feeding area, the little clinic station we'd set up with help from Dr. Morris. Fender followed us the entire time, checking on each group like a tour guide. Rusty stayed back at the porch, but watched from a distance. At the end of the visit, the kids handed me a card. Crayon drawings of dogs covered the front. Inside it said, "Thank you for saving the dogs. Fender is a superhero." I read it out loud, and when I looked down, Fender was sitting straight, tail wagging like he knew exactly what it said. That afternoon, I placed the card on the windowsill. Later that week, Fender did something I never expected. It was evening. I was in the yard fixing a hinge on one of the gates when I heard barking. Not normal barking, urgent, sharp. Fender never barked like that. I dropped the wrench and ran. He was by the edge of the fence, growling now, low and focused. I followed his gaze. There was a dog just outside the fence. Thin, long-legged, wound, tan coat, eyes wide with panic. It was darting back and forth, not sure whether to approach or bolt. Fender didn't bark again. He just stood there, tail up, body alert. After a minute, he took 2 steps back from the fence and lay down. I stayed quiet. The stray edged closer, inch by inch. Eventually, it reached the gap in the fence, slipped through. Fender didn't move. The dog sniffed him, sniffed the ground. Then, as if understanding something invisible, laid down too. I took a slow step forward. Fender looked back at me, then turned toward the house. He walked. The new dog followed. I watched them make their way to the porch. Fender climbed the steps and sat beside Rusty, who had just lifted his head to see what the fuss was. The newcomer circled once, then curled up right beside them. No growling, no fuss. That night, we named her Maple. The kids had left a bag of collars, and one had a tiny maple leaf on the tag. Over the next few months, things picked up. People came to adopt. Sometimes they left with a dog. Sometimes they came just to visit, to meet Fender. He became the face of the rescue, though he never cared for attention. He just wanted his place by the porch, his morning bowl, and his circle of friends. Christmas rolled in with a snowstorm that knocked out power. The house was cold, but the shed had backup heat from the propane system I'd installed, so we moved all the dogs there. I slept on a cot with 3 dogs curled at my feet and one on my chest. Fender stayed curled in the corner with Rusty and Maple. They kept each other warm. When the power came back, I found a package on my porch. No return address. Inside were 3 thick blankets, a new leash with Fender's name stitched on the handle, and a short note that simply said, "He saved more than dogs. Thank you." I showed it to Fender. He sniffed it, then walked over to his bowl like it was just another day. And it was. Just another day that felt like something bigger was always on the horizon. That spring, the county council invited me to speak. They wanted to give the rescue nonprofit status, offered a grant to expand. I stood in front of a dozen officials in a clean shirt and work boots and told them I hadn't planned any of this, that it all started with one dog sleeping on a sidewalk like he'd given up. Turns out he was just waiting, I said, waiting for someone to stop. They voted yes. We broke ground on the new shelter in June. It would be called Fender's Field, but none of that mattered to him. That night, I sat on the porch with Fender beside me, Maple resting her head on his shoulder, Rusty chewing a stick nearby. He didn't look at the sky, or the house, or the half-built barn at the edge of the field. He looked at me, and in that look was everything. A sidewalk, a blanket, a beginning that turned into so much more. The sound of hammers and saws had become as regular as birdsong around the property, and Fender didn't seem to mind one bit. Construction for the new shelter had started in full. The field beyond the old fence, once overgrown and uneven, now held wooden frames and trenches marked with rebar. Trucks came and went. Workers in flannel and denim hauled materials, and every time someone new arrived, they were introduced to Fender first. He'd walk out calmly, tail low and wagging. He'd give each visitor a sniff, sometimes a gentle nudge, and if they passed his silent test, he'd trot back to the porch and resume his post. No barking, no showboating, just quiet approval. By that time, Rusty had begun greeting people too, though he was still cautious. Maple, however, took to people fast. Her tail wagged so hard it looked like it might launch her into orbit. She'd nuzzle knees, lean into hands, and even flop over for belly rubs from complete strangers. Every dog who came through our gates seemed to take cues from the 3 of them. We had 17 dogs in the rescue by early April. Some were older, some pups, a few recovering from surgeries or bad homes. One dog, Daisy, a white retriever mix with cloud-soft fur, had been found in a ditch after heavy rains. Her back leg had been broken in 2 places, and she was terrified of car doors. The first time she met Fender, she crawled toward him on her belly and lay her head between his paws. He didn't move, didn't flinch, just lay there with her for almost an hour while I watched from the porch. That became a pattern. Fender was always there for the tough cases. Dogs that wouldn't eat? Fender would lie beside them during meals. Dogs afraid of people? He'd walk next to them when volunteers approached, acting like a buffer. It was like he knew exactly what each dog needed. A local reporter came by one Saturday. She was writing a piece on Fender's field and wanted a picture of the dog behind the name. I tried to get Fender to pose by the sign, but he didn't care much for cameras. He turned his back each time the shutter clicked, wandered off halfway through the session, and eventually lay under the bench in the shade. The reporter laughed. "He's not in it for the fame, huh?" "Not even close," I said. "He's just in it for the quiet." She published the story 2 days later with the headline, "The Dog Who Built a Sanctuary." That same week, we got a letter in the mail from a couple in Iowa. They'd read the article online, seen Fender's face, and said they'd cried reading the part about the sidewalk. They included a check, $100, with a note that simply said, "For the one who waited." I tacked that note above the feed station in the shed. The money helped, but the attention helped more. Donations ticked up. More supplies came in. We hosted our first open adoption event under a blue tarp tent behind the tool shed. We had 10 dogs up for adoption that day. 6 found homes. Fender watched from the porch the whole time. After the last family drove off with a golden spaniel in the back seat, I sat beside Fender with a paper plate of pulled pork and coleslaw. "We're doing it, huh?" I said. He didn't answer, of course, just shifted a little closer and rested his chin on my boot. That night, I couldn't sleep. Something about the success, the people, the pace of it all. It buzzed in my chest like electricity. The house was quiet. Dogs snored gently from the porch and the spare room. I walked outside and sat on the steps. Fender joined me 5 minutes later, as if he knew I was up. We sat like that for a while, under the stars, listening to crickets, and the faint rustling of Maple chasing something in her sleep. And then, I saw headlights in the distance. A car pulled up slowly, engine low. It wasn't unusual for someone to drop off a dog late at night. Some folks were ashamed to do it during the day. But this car parked crooked, engine idling. The passenger door opened, and a figure stepped out. Young man. Hoodie. He looked around, then lifted something small and carried it to the gate. I stood up. Fender followed. The man placed a crate near the fence and turned to leave. "Hey," I called out. He froze. "You okay?" He hesitated, then turned. His hood slipped down, revealing a pale face, no older than 20. He looked tired. Scared. "Is this the place for dogs?" he asked. "It is." He looked down. "She's my sister's. Was. She passed last week. I can't keep her. I'm sorry." He turned and rushed back to the car. Before I could respond, the door slammed and he was gone. I opened the gate and knelt beside the crate. Inside was a tiny beagle mix, no more than 4 months old, curled in a tight ball. Her eyes were wide, unsure. Fender sniffed the crate, then sat beside it. I carried her inside and placed her in the spare room with a blanket and a shallow dish of water. She didn't move, just stared. Fender stayed by the doorway. I named her Ellie. The next week was slow with her. She didn't bark, didn't play, didn't eat much unless Fender was nearby, so he stayed close. At night, he'd sleep just outside her room. During the day, he'd nudge her gently toward food, or lay near her when she curled up. It took 9 days before she wagged her tail. And when she did, it was because Fender had dropped a ball in front of her and pawed it toward her paws. She batted it once, then again. And that was all he needed. By the 3rd week, she followed him everywhere. People always asked if I trained him to do all that. I didn't. I couldn't have. It was like he just knew what needed doing, and he did it. Fender didn't ask for praise. He didn't need it. He only needed a purpose, and I think he found it in those quiet, broken dogs who needed someone like him. That summer, the new building opened. Air-conditioned rooms, medical station, play area. We held a little ribbon-cutting ceremony. Mayor came out. Even the news. I gave Fender the honor of walking through the doors first. He didn't understand it, but he walked through with his usual quiet pride, tail swaying. Over the next month, we expanded intake, took in dogs from neighboring counties, a few rough cases too, dogs with burn scars, broken bones, lost eyes. They arrived shut down. But Fender made time for each of them. Always first to greet. Always the last to walk away. And always the first to sit outside their kennel without a word until they decided he was safe. Ellie grew fast. Became a little fireball of energy, darting across the field, barking with joy. She and Maple became partners in chaos, often chasing each other until both flopped in the dirt, panting. Fender watched them like a proud older brother. Sometimes he joined in. Other times he stayed close to me, especially when we had long days of work ahead. Then came Scout. Scout was a husky lab mix brought in after animal control seized a group of neglected dogs from a hoarder's house. He was angry, snapped at everyone, wouldn't eat, wouldn't be touched. We had to keep him separate. Fender saw him from the fence and sat across from his pen for over an hour. Didn't bark, didn't growl, just sat. Scout paced, snarled, barked. Fender didn't move. This went on for 3 days. Same thing. Fender sat. Scout barked. On the 4th day, Scout stopped barking, just stared. And by the end of the week, they were nose to nose through the gate. A few days later, I let Scout out under supervision. Fender walked beside him around the yard. No fights, no fear. That was the thing about Fender. He didn't force anyone. He just waited. One evening, I was sitting on the back porch, sorting through adoption paperwork. The sun was going down, casting the field in orange. Fender came over and sat beside me. "How do you know who needs you the most?" I asked. He looked out across the yard where Ellie, Rusty, Maple, and Scout played. Then he stood, stretched, and wandered off. Like always, just quietly doing what he was born to do. The first time Fender refused to come out of the barn, I figured he was just tired. We'd had a long day of visits, 2 adoption appointments, a delivery of new supplies, and a school tour group of 3rd graders who left behind more crayon drawings than I had fridge space for. By the time I'd finished cleaning the kennels, Fender was already curled up in the back corner of the barn on his usual blanket, facing the wall. I crouched down next to him. "Come on, boy. Let's head inside." He didn't budge, just blinked slowly, chest rising and falling with a lazy rhythm. I gave him a scratch behind the ear and let him be. Sometimes he liked to sleep out there when the day had been especially busy, but the next morning, he was still in the same spot. That's when I started to worry. He got up when I called his name, but sluggishly. His tail didn't wag. He walked behind me like his paws were made of stone. I offered him breakfast, his favorite, eggs mixed in with soft kibble, but he only sniffed it, took one small bite, left the rest. Rusty paced in circles. Maple kept whining and nudging his side. Ellie brought over a toy and dropped it beside his bowl. I crouched next to him, rubbed his neck. "You okay, buddy?" He didn't answer, of course, but something in his eyes made my gut twist. I called Dr. Morris that afternoon and scheduled a visit. The exam didn't give us much to go on. Slightly elevated temperature. No specific signs of injury or infection. Dr. Morris took some blood, told me to monitor his behavior, gave me a mild antibiotic just in case, and told me to bring him back if he didn't improve. The rest of the week felt off. Fender slept more, ate less. The other dogs were quieter too, like they knew something was off. I spent more time sitting beside him in the barn, reading old letters from Sarah, telling stories about dogs we'd adopted out, just talking, the way I always had when it was just the two of us. Friday morning, the call came. Dr. Morris had the blood test results. "Liver function's off," he said. "Could be early signs of something chronic. Could be a reaction to something environmental. We'll run more tests." I didn't like the sound of that, but I nodded, thanked him, and hung up. That night, I moved Fender's blanket into the living room, set up his food and water beside the couch. I laid there with him for hours, watching the ceiling fan spin while Maple snored beside my boots, and Rusty kept watch from the doorway. Ellie curled against Fender's side. The next morning, he licked her ear. And then, like nothing had happened, he stood up and walked out into the sun. He wasn't himself yet, but he was trying. That was enough for now. The summer pressed on. We installed new shade sails over the outdoor pens, added a small agility course in the side yard. The kids who visited loved it, especially watching Scout leap over the low hurdles and Ellie scramble through the tunnels. Fender didn't run as much anymore, but he always came to the field, lay in the grass, and watched. We kept his activity light. Short walks, soft food, more vet visits. Dr. Morris prescribed liver supplements, and slowly, his appetite returned. One morning in July, I walked into the barn to find him standing at the far end, tail wagging slightly, eyes fixed on something behind me, and I turned. A woman was walking up the driveway, mid-40s, hair tied back. She carried a folder in one hand and a bag of treats in the other. Maple was already dancing around her feet. She introduced herself as Cassidy, said she worked with a therapy dog organization. They'd read about Fender's work with shy and traumatized dogs. "We think he might qualify," she said, "not just as a therapy dog, but as a teacher, for our younger dogs in training." I looked at Fender. He blinked. "He's getting older," I said. "He's not as quick as he used to be." "He doesn't have to be quick," she replied. "He just has to be steady." We agreed to a trial. Cassidy came every afternoon for 2 weeks, observing, taking notes. She brought a golden pup named Tilly, skittish and easily overwhelmed. Fender didn't approach her right away, just let her exist in the same space. After a few days, Tilly started following him. Ate when he did. Drank when he did. By the end of the second week, she was letting Cassidy brush her coat without flinching. "He's got something special," she said to me one evening. "You should think about letting him come to our training center, not full-time, just once a week. We'll handle the drive." I wasn't sure. I liked having him here, and I worried about the stress. But Fender seemed happy during those sessions. Alert, focused. So I agreed. Every Wednesday morning, Cassidy would pull up in her van. Fender would climb in with calm certainty, lie down beside Tilly, and ride to the center. He always came home tired, but content. Meanwhile, the rescue was growing. A retired vet named Henry began volunteering part-time. A local college offered interns from their animal science program. We hosted workshops, fundraisers, adoption fairs. People from 3 counties knew the name Fender's Field. And always, Fender remained the heart of it. Then, one Sunday afternoon, something unexpected happened. I was out back repairing a section of fence when I heard Maple barking. Not her playful bark, but the alert one. Sharp. Repeated. I dropped the hammer and jogged to the front. A man stood just outside the gate. Early 20s. Scruffy beard. Baseball cap. He was holding something. A weathered photo. Fender was already by my side. The man looked nervous. You the guy who runs this place?" "That's me." He held out the photo. "This your dog?" I took it. The image was old, grainy, a younger Fender, clearly malnourished, standing next to a broken fence. Same eyes, same posture. "Yeah," I said carefully. "That's him." The man swallowed. I think I knew him before." Fender stepped forward. His tail didn't wag, but he sniffed the man's shoes, then looked up. The man crouched down. "I didn't know what they were doing to you. I was just a kid. I didn't even live there full time. My uncle, he wasn't right. He kept dogs in bad conditions. I tried to get one out, just one. It was you. But he caught me." He stood up quickly, tears in his eyes. "I always wondered if you made it." Fender tilted his head, then walked back to me and sat down. "You saved him," I said. "No," the man said. "You did. I just gave him one shot. You gave him everything else." He didn't stay long, left behind a donation envelope and the photo. I kept the photo in the office, framed it next to the newspaper articles. Fender never acted strange after that. He wasn't haunted. He didn't sulk. It was like whatever wound had once existed had already healed. That night, we had a quiet dinner on the porch. Just me, Fender, Rusty, Maple, Ellie, and Scout. The stars blinked above. The crickets sang. And Fender, curled beside my chair, let out a single, soft sigh. Things weren't slowing down, but they were steady. And Fender was steady too. Every new pup who came through our gates looked to him first. And every time he offered the same quiet message. "You're not alone anymore." And that made all the difference. August came in heavy with heat. Even the mornings felt weighed down, like the air had forgotten how to move. The dogs lay stretched out under trees or huddled in the shaded pens, tongues lolling. Fender stayed mostly inside now, lounging near the oscillating fan I set up just for him in the kitchen. He still made his daily rounds, slow but steady, checking the barn, inspecting the fence line, nosing open the doors to each pen like a supervisor clocking in. But by midday, he'd settle into the same worn spot on the living room rug, head on his paws, eyes half-lidded. I noticed his steps had grown heavier. He didn't rise quite as fast anymore, and when he lay down, he moved like his joints had started to whisper back at him. I asked Dr. Morris to visit and take another look. "Nothing too alarming, just age," he said. Liver markers were holding steady, appetite was good, but the years were catching up. "He's still got time," Dr. Morris said, scratching behind Fender's ear. "But maybe give him fewer responsibilities. Let him rest more." I nodded. Fender flicked his tail, but didn't get up. That afternoon, I asked Cassidy if she could pause the therapy visits for a while. She agreed without hesitation. Said Tilly, the golden pup, had already started stepping into Fender's shoes, mimicking his behavior with the younger dogs. "He taught her well," she said. "That's the thing about dogs like him. They leave more than they take." With Fender slowing down, the others started stepping up. Rusty, still cautious, had become the unofficial greeter. He would be the first to check out new arrivals, his presence calm but observant. Maple kept the energy high, organizing playtime in her own chaotic way. Scout had mellowed since his early days. He watched over the yard like a quiet sentinel, warning the others with a low bark if something felt off. Ellie, though, had changed the most. She'd grown into a sleek, confident dog, full of energy and curiosity. But she never left Fender's side for long. In the evenings, when the other dogs were romping through the yard or collapsing into happy heaps of fur, she'd lie beside him, her head resting across his shoulders. They all seemed to know. One morning, I woke up to the sound of a low bark. Not sharp, but insistent. I rolled out of bed and followed the noise to the porch. Ellie was standing at the door, ears perked. I opened it, and she darted toward the west field. Fender was already out there. I grabbed my boots and followed. The sun had just started rising, casting gold across the fields. Fender stood near the far fence, tail stiff. I scanned the grass and spotted it. A pup. Small, matted, trembling. Probably dumped overnight. Fender didn't move closer. He just stood there. The pup looked at him, unsure, then took a step forward, then another. Within minutes, the pup was pressed to Fender's side. I knelt and gently scooped him up. A few cuts, ribs showing, but he wasn't in bad shape. "Let's call you Milo," I said. Fender walked back with us, slow but purposeful. That became a routine. Every few weeks, someone would bring in a new dog, or one would appear at the edge of the property like they knew this was the place. Sometimes folks called ahead. Sometimes they didn't. Milo adjusted fast, lived up to his name with a mischievous streak. He loved tug-of-war with Maple, and for some reason had taken to curling up on Rusty's back like it was a pillow. Fender watched all of it. He rarely joined in anymore, but he was always present. Then came a day when I didn't see him on the porch in the morning. My chest tightened. I walked around the house, called his name. No answer. No sound. Finally, I found him in the barn. Not on his blanket, but sitting in the corner, looking out the window toward the fields. I approached slowly. He didn't look at me at first. "You okay, boy?" He finally turned. His eyes were soft, tired. I sat beside him on the floor, just like I had the first night I brought him home. "You've done more than anyone ever expected. You know that?" He blinked, then shifted slightly, pressing his head to my knee. For the rest of that day, I stayed near. No chores, no errands, just me and him. The others seemed to know something was different. They didn't clamor or bark or beg. They moved slowly, respectfully, drifting through the barn with quiet glances and gentle sniffs. Fender didn't eat much that night, just a few bites. I didn't force him. Dr. Morris came by the next day. Ran more tests. Nothing urgent, but age was clearly settling in. Arthritis in the hips, mild anemia, liver still steady, but everything else slowing. "Keep him comfortable," Dr. Morris said. "He's earned it." And so we did. I set up a cushioned bed by the porch, under the shade, where Fender could watch the field. Brought his meals out there, read to him in the evenings, played old songs Sarah used to love, soft piano and guitar pieces that drifted on the wind. Kids still came to visit. They all wanted to meet him. I had to put up a sign asking people not to touch him without me present. He never growled, never snapped, but I didn't want him overwhelmed. He got a new fan mail letter almost every week now. People shared stories of how they rescued a dog because of him, how their kids learned empathy after hearing his journey, how seeing him heal gave them hope. I read them all aloud. He'd blink or flick an ear, and I took that as a thank you. One morning, I found Ellie in his bed before dawn, curled around him like a shield. She didn't move when I approached. I let them be. Around that time, a woman named Rachel reached out. She ran a documentary project about animal sanctuaries across the country. She wanted to include Fender's Field in her series. Only if Fender's up for it, I told her. She visited that weekend, brought a small camera crew. They kept their distance. Let me do the talking. I told them everything, from the first morning I found him by the diner to the kids who left cards at the gate. "What do you think he's taught you most?" Rachel asked, adjusting her mic. I looked at Fender, lying in his usual spot with Ellie at his side. "That healing isn't loud," I said. "Sometimes it's quiet. And sometimes it comes with 4 legs and a tired back, but a heart that never stops showing up." She nodded, didn't ask anything else. After they left, I sat with Fender for a while. The wind rustled the trees. A squirrel darted across the fence line, and Fender closed his eyes, exhaled slowly, and slept. That night, I walked the property like I used to. Checked every pen, made sure each latch was secure. Water bowls filled, lights dimmed. Fender didn't follow this time. He stayed by the porch. But when I came back, he was sitting upright, watching, like always. The moon lit his fur silver. His ears twitched once. And as I walked up the steps, he lowered himself gently and waited for me to sit beside him. So I did. Because no matter how much had changed, that part never would. The first frost came earlier than usual that year. By the second week of October, the morning grass was already crisp underfoot, and I had to dig out the heavy blankets from the back of the closet. Fender, always the early riser, had stopped waiting by the door in the mornings. These days, I'd find him curled under the table or tucked in beside Ellie, who had taken to sleeping so close to him that I once had to check twice to make sure they weren't somehow tangled into one animal. Fender still did his rounds, though slower now. He'd stop midway across the field and sit for a bit, watching the breeze ruffle the tall grass. Sometimes he'd glance toward the road, then back at the barn. He was like a caretaker who knew every inch of the place and didn't need to inspect as much anymore, just wanted to be sure the peace was still holding. We had 5 new arrivals that week. One of them, a brindle hound named Buster, had been found limping along a highway in Tennessee. A volunteer rescue group brought him up in a van, his legs splinted and wrapped in gauze. He barked at everything. At first we thought it was fear, but after a few days we realized he was just loud. Buster barked to announce his hunger, barked to greet the sunrise, barked to express satisfaction with a good meal. The moment Booster saw Fender, though, he went silent. Just stared. Fender didn't approach, just lay under the porch with his chin resting on his paws. Buster took a few cautious steps forward, stopped, then sat. That evening, he curled up on the porch next to Fender without a word. Maple approved right away. Ellie didn't seem to mind. Rusty gave him a side-eye for 3 days, then accepted him after they shared a chew toy in companionable silence. That's how things worked at Fender's Field. No long introductions, no hierarchy, just dogs figuring each other out, following Fender's lead. One crisp morning, I walked out to see 3 of the younger pups tumbling across the yard like tumbleweeds in a storm. Scout was supervising from his usual spot by the fence, ears alert. I set a new water bowl out by the shed, then wandered back to the house to refill Fender's. He was already awake, standing by the steps with that slow, steady tail sway of his. He followed me inside, and, for the first time in a while, actually barked. Just once, a low, short woof. I turned. He stood by the hallway, looking toward the back door. "What is it?" He turned and padded toward the laundry room. I followed, not sure what he was after. That's when I noticed the cabinet was open. Inside was a plastic bin of photos and letters. Sarah's things. I hadn't looked through them in years. Fender sat in front of it. I crouched and picked up a small photo album. The cover had curled with time, and the pages had yellowed at the edges. Inside were photos of our house before the rescue, before the pens, before the barn smelled of hay and dog shampoo. There were pictures of Sarah holding up paint swatches against the porch railing, her laughing as she sat on the hood of my truck, her standing barefoot in the garden. The last photo was of me and her, sitting on a bench at the fairgrounds, cotton candy in one hand and a corn dog in the other. My arm was around her, and she had her head on my shoulder. I hadn't thought about that day in a long time. Fender nudged my hand. I set the photo down. "You'd have loved her," I said softly. "And she'd have adored you. She always said dogs understand things better than people, said they feel with their whole selves." He laid down beside me and didn't move for a long time. Later that day, we hosted a school field trip. 30 kids from the elementary school. Their laughter bounced through the field as they tossed tennis balls and cooed over the smaller pups. Ellie soaked up the attention, as usual. Maple did zoomies around their legs. Rusty sat like a statue and allowed gentle head pats. Fender stayed back by the porch. One boy, small and quiet, stood apart from the rest. I watched him wander toward the house, clutching a crumpled drawing in one hand. He approached Fender slowly, crouched a few feet away. "Hi," he said. Fender turned his head. "My dog died last month," the boy whispered. "I miss her." He held out the drawing. It was a crude sketch of a brown dog with floppy ears. Fender stood, walked over, and sat down beside him. The boy didn't reach to pet him, just sat, shoulder to shoulder. His teacher came to collect him 10 minutes later. I watched the boy walk away, glance back once, then hold the drawing to his chest. That evening, I found the boy's name in the thank you card they sent the next day. His name was Jacob. He'd written in blocky letters, "Fender made me feel like maybe my dog is still with me somehow." Fender stayed close to the porch more often after that. I added a ramp for him when the steps got too much. He started sleeping longer, waking later, but his eyes stayed bright, always watching. One rainy morning, Cassidy came by with Tilly and a couple new recruits, 2 lab mixes and a shaggy shepherd. She said they'd been struggling to get them used to the harness and leash routine. I brought Fender out, wrapped in a soft blue sweater, and let him sit nearby as Cassidy worked with them in the barn. He didn't have to do much. Just his presence alone seemed to calm them. By the end of the session, one of the labs had stopped pulling, and the shepherd was lying down, relaxed, next to Tilly. Cassidy turned to me. "He's got a gift. Doesn't matter how old he gets. They feel it." I nodded. "I know." Scout developed a habit of walking Fender to the barn in the mornings. Not right beside him, just behind him, a little off to the side. It started after a day when Fender tripped slightly while stepping over the hose. Scout had been watching and moved in silently, like he was there just in case. The next day, Scout followed him again. Then, the day after. It became their ritual. It felt like everyone had adapted to Fender's rhythm now. Meals ran on his clock. Nap times followed his lead. Even the younger dogs, full of energy and often chaos, seemed to temper their play when he was nearby. People noticed during visits. They'd comment how calm the dogs were, how peaceful everything felt. They didn't know it was because of him. Because of the way he'd built something, not with barked commands or teeth, but with silence, steadiness, and presence. In early November, a letter arrived from a woman named Judy. She was the director of a dog sanctuary in Vermont. She wrote about her own journey, about how a mutt named Winston had changed her life. And she'd followed Fender's story since the beginning. Her final paragraph asked if I'd ever considered writing a book. About him, she wrote. Not you. About Fender. From Fender's point of view. People need more stories like his. Quiet ones that grow. I folded the letter and set it beside the others. I wasn't a writer, not really. But I started jotting things down. Not in any organized way, just memories. The sidewalk outside Trudy's, the first sandwich, the blanket, the porch, the first time his tail wagged. Sometimes I'd read them aloud. Fender didn't react much, but I liked to think he listened. Thanksgiving came and went with a flurry of visitors. Volunteers brought trays of sweet potatoes and turkey slices, mostly for the humans, but everyone knew the dogs got their fair share too. I gave Fender a full plate, soft bits only, which he ate slowly but completely. After the meal, as families started loading back into their cars and kids said goodbye to their favorite dogs, I sat with Fender by the fence, watching the sun set over the hill. He rested his head on my knee, a little heavier than usual. I didn't say anything. Just let the silence stretch. Because some moments don't need words. And this one, like so many before it, belonged entirely to him. December came in slow and gray. The first snow held off longer than expected, but the skies stayed heavy. Everything looked like it had been washed in silver, from the tin roof of the barn to the leafless trees that stood like sentinels around the field. The ground crunched underfoot with a mix of frost and dry earth, and I caught myself scanning the sky each morning, waiting for flakes that never seemed to fall. Fender didn't mind the cold as much as I expected. He still moved slow, and his hips seemed to stiffen more each day, but he spent hours on the porch, wrapped in a thick blanket, nose tucked under his paw. The others often gathered around him, Rusty always the closest, Ellie always the last to leave. They didn't pile on him anymore, not like they used to. It was more like they surrounded him with a quiet understanding. Keeping him warm, maybe. Or maybe just keeping close. I started lighting this fireplace in the evenings again. Fender would lie in front of it, and I'd pull my chair close, reading letters from supporters or sorting through old donation receipts. One evening, I found an envelope tucked into a box from weeks earlier. Inside was a photograph. It showed a woman, mid-60s, smiling beside a yellow dog in a park. On the back, written in shaky handwriting, it said, "He reminds me of Fender. Thank you for making me believe dogs can heal more than just themselves." I pinned the photo to the corkboard by the front door. We had fewer visitors that month, with the holidays approaching and the weather cooling fast. But the ones who came stayed longer. A young couple visited every Saturday to play with Maple. They hadn't committed to adopting her yet, but it was clear they were leaning that way. Maple always met them with her full body wiggle, pressing herself into their arms like she already knew. One morning, just after feeding time, I saw Maple sitting beside Fender's blanket, her head low. She wasn't wagging. She wasn't nudging. Just sitting, still and quiet. I walked over and scratched her head. Fender wasn't there. He was out in the field. It took me a moment to spot him, standing alone near the oak tree where we'd planted wildflowers the previous spring. I crossed the yard and walked slowly toward him, boots crunching on frozen grass. When I reached him, he didn't look up. Just stood there, his breath puffing softly in the cold air. "What are you doing out here?" He turned his head then, just slightly, and blinked. I looked at the ground. The flower patch had wilted, of course, covered in brittle stems and a light dusting of frost. But it still carried something peaceful. Fender exhaled again and lowered himself gently to the ground. I sat beside him. We stayed like that for a while. No rush. Later that day, I mentioned it to Dr. Morris during his routine visit. "He's finding his spots," he said gently, adjusting his stethoscope. "Some dogs do that. They choose places that feel right. Memory spots. Places where the world goes quiet." I nodded. Fender had always been drawn to stillness. Not laziness. Stillness. The kind that had weight to it. Meaning. He spent more time out there that week. Not the whole day. Just an hour or two each morning. Then he'd come back, nudge open the screen door, and settle in for a nap by the fire. Rusty, for the first time, started following him. Always a few steps behind. Fender didn't mind. Sometimes he'd glance back, make sure Rusty was still there, then continue on. When he stopped to sit, Rusty would circle a few times and settle down beside him. It reminded me of those early days, when Rusty wouldn't come near anyone but shadowed Fender like a nervous little brother. He still did, in his own way, but now it felt more like loyalty than fear. Ellie grew restless with the slow pace. She still had bursts of energy that sent her careening across the yard, skidding in the dirt, barking into the wind. But after each wild chase, she'd find Fender and collapse beside him, panting, ears twitching. One afternoon, I found an old box of Christmas lights in the shed. I untangled them while Fender watched from the porch, then strung them along the fence and across the barn doors. The kids from the local school had made paper ornaments, laminated and waterproofed, shaped like paws and bones. We clipped them to the lights with clothespins. Each one had a dog's name on it. When I finished, I plugged them in. The barn lit up with a soft glow. Fender didn't react right away, just watched. Then slowly, his tail gave a single thump. That was enough. In the days that followed, people began dropping off wrapped gifts, blankets, treats, collars, toys. Some left handwritten cards. One woman sent an entire basket of socks. "Because my dog always stole mine," she wrote. On Christmas Eve, the shelter was quiet. Snow had finally fallen, just enough to dust the field in white. The dogs stayed close to the house, preferring the warmth of the porch and the crackling fire inside. I made a plate of turkey, mashed potatoes, and carrots for the dogs. They took turns, polite as ever. Fender ate last. He chewed slowly, carefully, then licked the plate clean. I sat beside him on the porch steps, watching snowflakes drift from the roof. "This place used to feel so big," I said. "Now it feels just right." He leaned his head against my knee. I don't know how long we sat there, but eventually Rusty joined us. Then Ellie. Maple curled at Fender's other side. Scout hovered near the gate, then came and settled nearby. All of us, just sitting in the snow, breathing the same cold air, hearts steady. That night, I lit one last fire and left the front door open so Fender could decide where to sleep. He chose the hearth, like always. In the morning, he was still there, snoring softly. Over the next week, more snow came. The rescue operated on winter hours, shorter visits, more time indoors. We started training the younger dogs to help with daily tasks. Tilly, Cassidy's golden, came by often to practice leash walking with the new pups. She was gentle, confident, and clearly proud of her work. I noticed she'd started sleeping on Fender's old blanket when he wasn't using it. I asked Cassidy about it. She smiled. "It's where she feels calmest," she said. "It smells like him." Everything smelled like him, I thought. The porch, the barn, even the old truck. Not just his scent, but his spirit, his presence. He was in the way dogs approached each other now, the way they took their time, the way they waited instead of rushing. Fender had taught them patience just by existing. One morning, I watched Milo, a dog barely 6 months old, guide a nervous shepherd across the yard by circling back every few steps. It was something Fender used to do. Wait, then walk. Wait, then walk. I smiled. They remember. Fender was asleep in the sun, unaware or maybe just at peace, knowing the lesson had stuck. On New Year's Eve, we had a small gathering. Just a few close friends, some volunteers, and the dogs. No fireworks, too much noise. Just warm cider, a fire pit, and a sky full of stars. I made a toast around 8, early enough for those with kids to get home. I raised a mug. "To second chances," I said. "To quiet strength. To the dog who never asked for anything but gave us everything." Fender lifted his head. The guests clapped. Someone handed him a cookie. He ate it slowly, then leaned against Ellie, who licked his ear. I don't remember what else I said. It didn't matter. Everyone already understood. The first morning of the new year came in soft and white. A blanket of snow lay quiet over the entire field, untouched and glowing pale blue under the dawn sky. I opened the door to let the dogs out and found them standing just past the porch, noses lifted, their breath fogging in the cold. No barking, no running, just silence, like the world was holding its breath. Fender didn't come out right away. He was lying by the fireplace, his head raised, eyes alert but not eager to move. I walked over, crouched beside him. "You want to come see the snow?" He didn't stand, but after a few seconds, he lifted his head and nudged my knee. So I waited. I didn't call him again. I just held the door open and let him decide. A few minutes later, he stood, slow and deliberate. The others made space as he stepped out onto the porch. Ellie trotted beside him, brushing his side gently with her nose. Rusty walked ahead, circling back every few steps. Maple bounded ahead in the snow, leaving a zigzagging trail, and Scout lingered at the fence, tail straight. Fender walked to the top step, then stopped. I watched him scan the field. He looked at the barn, the trees, the fence line, the oak tree in the west field. Then he stepped down and walked. I followed behind, not too close. He led us across the field, his paw prints forming a perfect path through the snow. The others fell in behind him, no pushing or playing, just a silent parade of fur and breath. He stopped beneath the oak tree, sat down, then laid all the way down, his legs folding beneath him, his body still but upright. Ellie sat beside him, her head just under his chin. Maple pressed in close, Rusty curled beside his flank. Scout lay down last, keeping watch towards the gate. I stood a few paces back, my hands in my coat pockets, breath clouding in front of me. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Fender looked at me. Not long, just a glance, and then he closed his eyes. I stood there until my legs went numb, until the cold pressed through my boots, until the sky turned from blue to silver. I knelt beside him, placed my hand on his back. He was still warm, still peaceful. But he was gone. The wind was so gentle, it barely moved the snow on the branches above. Ellie made a soft noise, a tiny whine that faded almost as soon as it began. Rusty stood up, walked a few steps away, then lay down again. Maple pressed her face into the snow, quiet. Scout stayed where he was, still and strong. I stayed there a long time. Eventually, I rose and went to the shed. I brought back Fender's blanket, the one Sarah had quilted years ago, the one that had traveled from the sidewalk to the porch, from the barn to the fire. I wrapped it around him. That afternoon, I dug. Not quickly, carefully. I chose the spot under the oak tree where he'd watched the wildflowers bloom. The sun hit it just right, even in winter. A few neighbors came by when they heard. Trudy brought coffee and fresh biscuits. Pete from the hardware store stood beside me for over an hour, neither of us speaking. The kids from the school sent a handmade sign that said, "Fender's Field Forever." Cassidy came with Tilly and left a worn tennis ball beside the grave. That night, the porch was unusually quiet. The dogs stayed close to me, like they didn't know where else to go. Ellie wouldn't leave my side. Rusty lay beside the front door and didn't move until morning. The next few days felt heavy. I went through the motions, feeding, cleaning, checking the gates. But everything was slower, softer. The other dogs noticed too. Fewer games, less barking, more leaning on one another. But it wasn't sadness that lingered. Not exactly. It was something gentler, a kind of hush, like the world was nodding. People started sending more letters. Some were short. He changed me. Others told stories of their own dogs, of rescues, of heartbreak, of healing. One woman wrote, "Fender never looked into my eyes, but somehow I feel like he saw me." A boy sent a sketch of Fender under the oak tree, surrounded by stars. The caption said, "Every hero gets a resting place." I framed that one. By February, things began to shift. The younger dogs started playing more again. Ellie led the charge most days. Scout took over the morning walks. Rusty became the unofficial welcome committee, walking new dogs to their pens and standing watch until they settled. And Tilly began lying on Fender's blanket each morning, just for a while, before starting her therapy dog routines with Cassidy. The oak tree became a landmark. Visitors left flowers. Children tied ribbons to the low branches. I added a simple wooden sign. "Fender, you made it home." On the first warm day of spring, I walked out into the field alone, coffee in hand. The sun was just starting to rise, painting everything in gold. I sat under the tree and listened to the breeze. The dogs joined me one by one. Ellie pressed her shoulder to mine. Rusty sat facing the wind. Maple flopped dramatically in the grass. Scout stood beside us, tall and still. I looked at each of them and felt something settle inside me. He was here. In every paw print, in every wagging tail, in every soft sigh before sleep. He wasn't gone. Not really. Not from this place. Not from us. And as the sun rose higher and the dogs chased one another through the field, I stood up and walked back toward the porch. It was time to start the day, because the world keeps going. And Fender's Field was still full of life, exactly as he left it.